Well, welcome to the Planetarium Zoom seminar. This is the very first Planetarium Zoom seminar of 2024. Today we have AJ Balatico, who will present about polar sciences in a live planetarium show. AJ has a master's degree and he's a PhD candidate in learning sciences and human development at the University of Washington in Seattle. He previously was a public high school science teacher in Louisiana, but he's especially interested in feedback on future education research in planetariums. He is currently president of the Graduate and Professional Student Senate at the University of Washington. I would say that in as usual in a Zoom seminar, keep yourself muted, but AJ, I assume that you're welcome questions anytime during the presentation.
Sure. Quick questions here and there, and then a Q&A session at the end would be great.
Okay, sounds good. So the only other thing I would want to add is that we like to get an idea of who's attending, and we have a sign-in sheet, which is the chat. And so if you can put your name and where you're from in the chat, that will be our sign-in sheet. And without further ado, AJ, it's yours.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Alan, for inviting me. Alan had sent a request for me to present, I guess, around September, and then I have watched previous PPA Zoom seminars, so I'm happy to be here. Let's see, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so thank you for that introduction. Yes, I'm a PhD candidate in the College of Education. My primary area is science education and gifted education policy. So planetarium sciences are not really my forte, but as an informal learning environment, science museums have a special place in my heart. So as Alan said, I'm from Louisiana, but hadn't really had like a home science center or science museum until I came over to Seattle at the Pacific Science Center. And it really helps to have like the Space Needle right next to it as a, as a way to get other people to come on down with me and to watch this planetarium show. So this was a collaboration between the Pacific Science Center, the University of Washington, and the National Science Foundation through a grant, and the Applied Physics Lab in the Polar Science Center. So lots of different collaborations with the goal of addressing how public and school audiences learn about polar sciences at within a planetarium show that is live presented by a science interpreter or a graduate student who is working in those fields of polar science, especially in oceanography. So this is the agenda of the talk. I just want to give the research context, a little bit of background around the show, what kind of study we did in terms of the evaluation, the summative evaluation of the show in order to support its continuance within the Pacific Science Center's lineup, as well as a springboard for future projects between those different entities, as well as just the findings from the show, and then to ask you all about this methodology and how things can improve in terms of getting data to support the use of these kinds of shows in other contexts. This was a study that happened before COVID and conveniently ended on March 18th, 2020, at least the data collection. So that's why it's kind of frozen in time in some respects. And I would like to get feedback on future projects that could happen. So the show itself is called Earth Pole to Pole. So rather than focusing on the cosmos or outwards, it is a reflection of the Earth. We take a look over the night sky in both the Arctic and Antarctic, as well as just different locales and different perspectives on Earth. And then it began in June 2018 with pilot data, but my study didn't start until December, when we kind of tested it enough with smaller audiences to have a coherent show. There was also live updates in terms of new data sets being incorporated and tweaks based on audience feedback. Primarily, one of the things that, you know, one of the critiques that audiences gave early on was that there are no animals. They kind of expected polar bears or penguins to be featured. But for the most part, the research kind of aligned with oceanography and the earth sciences. So, adjusting some of the content to address audience. Then later on, that feedback, didn't come up as much. And then, yes, so the feedback related to the audience features, as well as the graphics and some of the technical hiccups when it comes to, on the fly adjustments to what is being projected on screen. The study's significance, like why we did this, was to see and raise awareness of polar science and its relationship to climate change, make polar science more accessible to young audiences, especially school-based programs, and then increase interest in polar science professions. Again, there's that misconception that polar scientists solely study animal populations and not the actual ice or oceans or even air currents throughout the world. So this is the projection setup. The Willard Planetarium in the Pacific Science Center can seat about 40 people around. I'm sure this audience knows a lot about planetarium. So the key questions addressed within the actual content of the show, it's about a 30 to 40-minute show. That time adjustment is based on the presenter's interpretation of the audience interest as well as the ages of the audience members. But for the most part, the key questions to be addressed in different segments of the show was, where's the Arctic, where's the Antarctic, why are they cold, how are they the same or different from each other, what is sea ice and what is glacial ice, and then how do the polar regions change over the course of a year, and then how have they changed over the last few decades, and then why does it matter? You can see from these key questions that the words climate change do not appear anywhere within this framing, at least in terms of the show content. And then this is the scripted outline. Again, you won't see the words climate change explicitly listed here. This is mostly factual presentation of geography, as well as measurements such as temperature and different air currents and oceanic currents throughout the decades. So initially, the show always starts in Seattle, over in the docks with the Coast Guard cutter Healy. And then from there, any of these different topics in purple could be the starting point of the show. It just really depends on how that first interaction with the presenter goes. But usually they go to the Arctic, and then they actually frame the Earth in the position in relation to the sun. That's probably the extent of the astronomy bits in this show. Everything else is related to the earth sciences. And then sea ice, especially in the Arctic, versus glacial ice, which is primarily in Greenland. They also try to evoke some audience knowledge. So questions like, you took an ice cube in a glass of water and it melted, what happens to the level of the water? That kind of stuff. And that usually engages at least somebody in an audience of around 28 people. Somebody will, interact, hopefully. And then going to the different locales, they do a comparison between the Arctic and the Antarctic, and then they take a look at global patterns, and then we'll take a look at a video later. And then eventually they fly back to Seattle. Here they might have a guest scientist segment depending on who is presenting. So if it is a, for example, researcher at the University of Washington or a graduate student, sometimes they might insert a particular segment about their own research. And some of them have live footage, for example, that could be projected into the auditorium. So this was the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Healy. The one in the show is an actual view of Seattle with different landmarks in the background, just to situate the audience. And then again, the context and way that it's presented focuses on sort of these as general themes. The astronomy bits talk about the seasonality and the extent of ice on Earth at different locations. The other thing that they want to convey to audiences is like the size of different land masses and the sizes of our oceans in relation to each other. So just because most people are familiar with Greenland being huge on a a flat 2D map versus on a planetarium, same thing for Antarctica. People don't realize that it's the size that it is. And as you can see here, I have a little picture of, there are no graphs or any other kinds of data displays beyond, the only thing that would be projected would be maps and different colors for the most part. And then there might be some imagery related to specific data sets that are inserted based on time and whether the audience kind of is vibing or interested in those topics. Okay, and then just a recap of the literature review, because this was a research paper published in Planetarium. Some of these, the initial project started in 2018, so that kind of explains some of the dating. But basic polar science facts about where things are and how quickly things are melting or not. That was reported by Hamilton and Bubella. News sources always don't get it right, or don't always get it right. So there's a lot of exaggeration, or there are differences in opinions on how to convey the severity of climate change, or if we use the words climate crisis. Some of the responses that we've gotten use terminology like global warming and so on. So like what that exactly means for different audiences is kind of one of those things that we need to have some insight in by asking people what they mean or what they think. And then their disagreements are usually over values rather than facts. So you could present the same kinds of data to folks and the relative importance of that particular issue, such as climate change. We hear opinions ranging from it doesn't exist to it's happening, but like how impactful are humans? And there are different levels of values assigned to how we should, as a scientific community, address the issues of climate change and the climate crisis. And then science museums and informal learning contexts, that generally people trust science museums as an institution, but it is a very elective experience. People choose to go there, and you might not capture like the full public. So, widening accessibility and inviting people in is definitely very important in terms of our educational enterprise. And then exhibits differ in levels of interactivity and scaffolding. So in the context of the Planetarium Show, it is fully supported by a presenter and somebody who could respond to audience questions. That also causes a different level of affordances when it comes to audience participation, just because of timing, and there might be some hesitation or reluctance to participate. Question for later. Yes, I did include planetarium specific ones. Dr. Plummer has been very helpful, Julia Plummer. I don't know if that name resonates, but yeah. And I could talk a little bit about that too. So yeah, planetariums as science learning environments, good at visualizing spatial relationships. It has participatory engagement and increases learning. We get to see things as they are, and then data sets can be visualized in a different way compared to just paper maps or projectors in a normal classroom. And then the only thing would be that we do a lot of comparisons with K-12 and college groups, but not really the general public or specific segments such as pre-kindergarten folks or even senior citizens. There's a lot of work at the University of Washington related to getting senior citizens engaged in citizen science and, doing active projects based on their interests. Okay, and then the affordances, presenters can respond to questions, clarify misconceptions, and then toggle visuals. They could troubleshoot, obviously, and then they can adjust the order of the show content. So even though I previously showed how it's scripted, the actual result might change depending on the day, depending on who is in the audience, and the actual presenter, just based on their familiarity or how they kind of adjust the flow. So the research questions were, what did audience members learn from the Polar Science Planetarium Show? How did their interests change before and after the show? And then what were the most engaging features for the audience? And then we had 674 surveys collected. So we did start December 8th, 2018. We did a pilot study for my first year in graduate school. We collected around 130 surveys at that time. And then the other evaluation, the summative evaluation of the actual quality of the show, was ongoing in fulfillment of the NSF grant, but we stopped on March 18th, 2020, just because of COVID and the closure of the Pacific Science Center to the public. Based on overall metrics, 14,573 people, or at least tickets, were issued. So a good chunk of that, most people hopefully showed up to over 521 showings, so 521 individual days or times when this show was presented. And then it was voluntary completion after the show. What I wanted to ask you all about a little bit later was based on how we collected data and ways that we could kind of address capturing a greater picture of the audience, because 674 versus 14,000, there are logistical things that as a education researcher, it's kind of one of those things where there are a lot of trade-offs when you're doing this kind of research. So this was the actual survey. As you can see, it's a front and back, and we learned that with a lot of education research, that you get what you get, or you can collect what people are willing to participate in. So for the most part, most people filled out the entire thing, but this was a 2-paged survey. We estimated it probably took about 5 minutes to complete this, especially since a lot of this is check boxes. But for the sake of completion, and then just as a reflection, some of the feedback was it is relatively long compared to like for the audience, what they wanted to get out of it was not really that it was unclear, but they were clearly doing a favor kind of thing, especially after like a 50-minute show or 40-minute show, and then doing a 5-minute survey afterwards, especially when the alternatives would be go outside and do something else fun, because they're at the Pacific Science Center. There's a lot of other activities to do. So part of how we pitched this was like framing, you're helping us improve science. So that was definitely a part of it. But yeah, this was the survey. And then from that, we kind of, I'm going to go through a little bit more quickly with the findings, but again, that's kind of the framing of how this research was conducted. So this was the script afterwards, and then notifying them of the different connections. I will say that UW, just by being in Seattle, saying that it was a UW project did help in terms of participation. But then that, presents the issue of it being kind of self-selecting. There was also only 8 clipboards. So out of all of the shows, the largest amount of feedback that we could get in any particular show was only 8. Yeah. Okay, and then my data analysis, Likert scale questions, and then the one open-ended after seeing the show, the most interesting thing that they learned about polar science was, and then their short answer. And then a lot of this was frequencies, but then I kind of wanted to look at group differences based on gender, age, race, and Pacific Science Center membership. There wasn't any clear distinction between different groups, but we could tell there's differences in levels of accessibility that I kind of want to talk about with this audience as well. So this was the demographic breakdown that was part of the article. Even though there were 600 something surveys completed, remember that this demographic information was on the back. So not everybody filled that out. So we got about 540 in terms of gender, race, and ethnicity. We got this many, and then age range, we got about 528. Very helpful for us to segment the population, and then asked about their membership, if they would recommend the show, and if they had been at the Pacific Science Center's planetarium before. So this was also a self-report of the expertise before the show. This presented a little bit of a tricky problem just because we couldn't capture their perceived expertise of polar science before the show because we didn't give them the survey. We didn't do like a pre and post survey kind of method. It was just all after the show, how they perceived, their level of expertise before the show. And then part of the audience, again, being self-selecting, were the oceanographers or were part of the community, the professional community who does this kind of research. So obviously their results are towards the 7 through 10 tail, while most people were clustered around from 0 to 6. Okay, and then the findings basically are in these flavors. What did they want to know more about polar science? How did their interests change? And what show features were most engaging? So these were just responses to literal questions about show content. For the most part, folks agreed or strongly agreed that they learned something about differences between sea ice and glacial ice, how changes in the Arctic are signs of global climate change, again, without using the words climate change in the show itself. And then this question about displacement kind of led to sort of audibles in terms of show content, trying to, audiences were not getting the displacement. So again, presenting examples of how the sea level might change depending on whether it was glacial ice or sea ice. So show content kind of shifted based on earlier survey data that we took. And then we also took some qualitative stuff, but that was not included in the study. This was their answer to the short answer. What did they learn about polar science after the show? So we had 469 write-ins, and they could broadly be categorized in these topics. The ones with the asterisks are ones that were not explicitly mentioned, but were kind of grouped by the researcher, while ice and water, they explicitly say the words ice or water in some contexts that wouldn't be, placed in some other category. And then as you could see, sea mammals and fish, they might have had specific instances or shows where they had a science presenter or graduate student or scientist. And then audiences really clung on to that particular segment. But for the most part, these were the distributions. So you can mull over that data. Astronomy, again, not a huge part of the show, but definitely matched the audience's expectation going into a planetarium. But as you could see, the rest of the write-ins revolved around polar sciences. And then these data kind of were uniform for most demographics, including crosstabs with gender and race, for example, or even membership. Membership really wasn't a factor in any of the responses that we saw. They weren't really predictive, or having seen a planetarium show before, it didn't really inform how they saw this planetarium show. But as you could see, the before today interest in polar science was lower than after today. And probing a little bit more, asking people about what they learned was kind of helpful in seeing the change. And then for a lot of the folks, a good portion of them who had answered not at all or not much, we realized that nobody really went down in polar science interest after the show. It either stayed the same or went up. So that was positive in terms of the findings for both the researchers and evaluators of this show. And then the overall experience was people enjoyed it. The only, I wouldn't say controversial, but the computer graphics of different representations of the Arctic when it was like live ice versus computer graphics or clip art representations of ice in the Arctic, that caused a little bit of judgment related to the visuals of the show. The goal was not absolute immersion, but that was something that later iterations of the show, we kind of made adjustments to that. So, for example, putting in live footage from the Arctic in that segment, that might have improved the imagery perception. And then this was data based on why did you attend the show? And for the most part, and this is, it could sum up to more than 100%. I like planetarium shows, more than half of the audience said that. And then school groups, incidentally, in the when it came down to survey taking, even though it was reported that there were many, many school groups that attended, it was just one of those things based on timing. We believe that a lot of school groups didn't have the opportunity to fill out the survey. So that was kind of an uncaptured audience there. So science museums, they're important for informal learning environments and developing new accessible content that they wouldn't get otherwise. So most people have not experienced this either in their daily life, through their news feeds, through any of their normal reading, or in their classrooms when it comes down to younger audiences. And then it might help get attendees more interested in continuing exploration of these STEM topics. And then the implications just based on the grant and some of our interests were degree attainment in the US. This is just older data from 2008 related to the distribution of gender or women in these fields of science. And there are lots of implications in terms of stated interests. So going back to this particular question, sorry. Before today, how interested were you in polar science? And then after today, how do you feel, how much do you feel you've learned in polar science? Women, especially under 18 women, reported a lower interest in polar science before the show, but then about the same as men in all categories after the show. So that change before and after the show was the biggest in that population. And for a 40-minute show, this is a really efficient intervention compared to like teaching a whole new class or giving some other kind of experience when it comes down to educational intervention. So this was of high interest to Washington educators, and I had presented this same information to school districts in Washington, and the hope was to be able to get, because this is basically something that could be projected, there are those mobile planetarium domes that could be brought out to schools and replicating the show and increasing accessibility of the program that way. So just a real quick discussion about accessibility. The live shows make the material more accessible, but fewer modern planetariums have live shows. It might just be a difference in terms of programming and budgets, and there's a lot of realities when it comes down to planetaria and science museums in terms of their programming, but this is definitely one of those things that could be replicated across contexts. And then perhaps more women may enter STEM fields. That's the hope. This is just a very small step, but the hopeful finding was that large increase that's detailed more in the paper. And then science museums help provide greater access. Again, field trips, they are happening, but again, that participation rate was kind of on the low side, but we do hope that these are of interest. Right now, at 1 o'clock Pacific time, this show is still ongoing. It's a part of their lineup, and it has been for the last since 2018. So we're glad to see that it's been pretty successful there. So there are implication questions, but I'm kind of more interested in questions that the audience might have. So thank you, everyone. This is my contact information, and then I will open up the screen with all of your beautiful faces. Okay.
Thank you, AJ. That was a really good presentation, and I think you've left a lot of time to have discussion, which is what you really want to get into discussion of things.
So I guess from my perspective, it was kind of a mix of having a convenience sample of just folks who kind of stood after the Planetarium show to like kind of participate or give feedback. Is that a normal protocol, or like have y'all had any experience of getting pre and post evaluations or like continuous evaluations amongst certain audience members? Or yeah, we could start with that, or I see that Jeff has a hand.
Yeah, in terms of other ways that I've heard people doing post evaluations, I can't remember who it was, Alan. Maybe you remember, but someone had told me about a token system that they had used. They set up like boxes at the exit, and then they gave everyone tokens, and you would just put the tokens in where you wanted your answer to be. They were short questions. They wouldn't like a questionnaire or anything like that, like yours. But that's something I heard. I can't remember who told me about that though. And then did you guys give an incentive for the survey at all, like a free ticket to the next planetarium show or whatever?
Right. No. So how the Pacific Science Center works out is the planetarium shows are included within the cost of going to the Pacific Science Center. I do remember for some of the more involved research, or more involved questioning when it came down to particular groups of guest scientists. So, for example, if a grad student was presenting, they wanted to focus more on getting feedback for that particular segment. So if I recall, they would give IMAX tickets to participants, but then that might have been like a longer 30-minute, hour-long commitment just to answer the questions. So yeah.
Right. I mean, in terms of rewarding people, I would wonder if that would even bias the results in a way that you don't want, right? But I just have so many questions. Thank you for doing this. First of all, people should interrupt me if they have their own questions. Otherwise, I'm just going to talk your ear off the whole time. But as someone who, I've always valued evaluation, of course. It's really important to all of our work, but it just doesn't. It's not my passion, right? So thank you for doing this work, first of all, and and my first real question, well, you kind of addressed it a little bit, but I noticed the 2009 Brazil paper that you cited. Is that really like the last research study to say, I think the last line in your slide was like planetariums need more study, and then like it's now 2024. Was that really like the last paper that was like planetarium specific about the efficacy of immersive environments
It
in
was,
learning?
but it was like one of the few meta-analyses across different studies. Um, I guess in terms of like, and this is, I guess, the difference between the subfield versus the larger enterprise of educational research. Because when I brought this up to like my larger community, I guess the questions are like, oh, that's a very, the assumptions about sampling and the assumptions about replicability and generalizability of the specifics were kind of up in the air. And then it's also segmentation by group. So whether it was a school group or in the context of a class versus just audience members going to the planetarium, that was kind of one of those things that there's a lot of research and general guidelines and practitioner-based feedback, but in terms of, and this is not diminishing any of the work, but in terms of, again, generalizability, that was kind of what came up. So I believe that was a meta-analysis. But yeah, there are definitely examples of really cool stuff happening at different planetaria in the intervening years.
Yeah, but I always try to look for very specific, like yours, evaluation of pedagogy and evaluation of efficacy of the shows, and especially live shows.
Yeah.
It's also incredibly difficult to even find research on that. So I mean, can I assume that when you looked for other people doing similar research to you specifically about polar signs, that can I assume that you found nothing? Is that accurate to say?
Right. So the polar signs within the planetarium setting, that was very low. But polar signs in general, forgive the pun, but it's polarized in terms of methodologies and how to do it with specific audiences and how do you attenuate like previous dispositions or how do you kind of get at what like inputs people are getting. That's been a tough part of just climate, public opinion related to climate change, for example. So yeah.
Thanks, and I interrupt Alan. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and Rosemary's next. She has her hand raised. I just wanted to, there's three things. Two of them are just to point out things that happened in the chat. Carol Holmberg says that they use QR codes after the show,
Yep.
which I think would be a very effective thing. And then April says they did surveys at the Fernbeck Science Center. The one other thing I wanted to mention is that it seems to me it'd be ideal to incorporate some kind of feedback or a sort of internal assessment mechanism within the show. So if there, in other words, like make it part of the show to have that kind of feedback built in, and that you would somehow get it during the show. Now, the thing that comes to mind with that, how do you do that? Well, a QR code can be used during a show, but that's almost like a landmine of technical possible technical difficulties.
Mhm.
But if that can be done smoothly, that would be ideal. There might be other ways to do that. So that's just an idea to do it in the show. Rosemary, what are you? You're muted, Rosemary.
So AJ, I was wondering if you were the presenter during some of the shows or if it was always someone else, and about how many different presenters were involved.
Oh yeah. So I was never a presenter. I was always like in the audience with a clipboard, just like noticing. I even have like you have to have a ticket every time you go, so I do have a stack of tickets. I probably went to like not exaggerating, like close to 50, maybe a little bit more than that. Especially between the periods of December to May in my first year. Just to see, because we did have, like, as I said before, there were adjustments to the show as it was going on. So realizing that, oh, people don't know what a gigaton is, or because one of the major facts that is supposed to be surprising was, you know, so many gigatons of ice is melting in Greenland. Oh no. And the feedback that one of the planetarians gave was nobody knows what that means. Gigaton kind of implies a big amount, but how much is that? So one of the metrics was how many Olympic-sized pools of ice is melting every second. That kind of made it more like grokkable. And then we did see that that particular question about displacement went up, like people understood it a lot better, or people, so feedback like that. As far as the amount of folks giving the presentations, I would say that there was definitely like the weekday crew versus the rush of the weekends. And then we have Polar Science Week in March. So I believe that was also like about the time the grad students were wrapping up their presentation. So there might have been a different presenter every day. But yeah, I would say that they were on a rotating basis of about 6 regular staff members throughout the week, and then a bunch of guest speakers. And then they also tag team, and this wasn't the only show that they presented. There was a rotation of about 5 shows. I think they're currently down to 3 currently at the Pacific Science Center, but the repertoire during the time of the study was about 5 different shows.
AJ, you never recorded any of the shows, did you?
No, unfortunately, it was one of those things. And then just thinking about the QR codes about like, use of the phone during the show is like, is that going to be distracting? I think that was actually something that we had thought about. If for the most part too, the surveys, that was like after the show and then even outside in the little hallway leading up and not in the planetarium itself. So yeah.
Okay, we have a representative from the other hemisphere. Cora, you have your hand raised.
Hi. Hey, my name is Cora. I'm also a PhD student and I'm from media studies, which might also be the reason for my question. So you mentioned that your show was presented live, but I do have more questions about like what the content looked like. So was the presenter talking all the time, or was he or she asking a lot of questions and the audience was responding a lot? So what type of image composition approach did you use? Or like you mentioned I think it was ice, like the different types of visualizations. So did you had a lot of like small rectangular images on the dome, or was it more like dome filling visuals? So what exactly did the content look like? Do you have more information on that?
Yeah, so the presenter would probably be talking the entire way through, but asking lots of questions, especially during the transitions between the segments. So you saw that there were probably like a dozen topics. Each of those was probably like a 4 to 10-minute segment. And then, during the transitions between those segments, because again, it was kind of like a choose your own adventure. They didn't have to start or stop in one particular place. For the most part, they did hit everything. And, Yeah, the visuals were mostly dome filling. There wasn't anything discrete or just like localized to one spot besides maybe this like the actual location of the sun, or the Earth relative to the sun, in the visual of like, us going around and talking about the seasons. For the most part, yeah, everything, the whole dome was lit. Again, and then with the insertions of some of the data sets, those were live, and for some reason that didn't, or I guess it didn't actually show up for some reason, but I'll post it in the chat. This was actually one of the data sets from NASA. It was, Alan, this was the one that we tried yesterday. Yeah, and again, it was just the only thing that it shows is things start out kind of blue and then they turn red as we get closer to the present day. Maybe I can share a screen again and maybe this will show up. So basically, and then they had recommended that people stare at one country or one spot on the Earth and then just see how the colors change throughout the years. So yeah, this was the kind of visual. Same thing with oceanic currents and atmospheric currents. It would only be displayed as a color. And then people would typically have questions, and especially if there were kids in the audience, you could bet that the participation was really high. Lots of why is it this, those kind of questions. With also like some scientific literacy or scientific pedagogy about, can science address why questions, or can they talk about how things occur on the Earth? Some science philosophy and some just improv, I guess, with a live presenter.
I have one follow-up question. So did the presenter just stood behind the console, or was the person
no.
standing in front or walking around a lot?
Yeah, usually walking around a lot. There are probably some other instances, but some props were used in, like, especially when it came down to the seasons. I know they had a globe in the planetarium. Also, like, describing the tilt of the Earth's axis revolving around the sun, like all that kind of stuff was visualized, or I even think it was like modified to just naturally go to the 23-degree angle. So it was, yeah, they did have props. I'm pretty sure they've had the little glass of water with the ice cube in it, those kind of visuals. They've had those kind of things. And then for the most part, my observations going to so many shows that there were very little times of like dead air, of like audience being prompted and not responding. For the most part, it is a back and forth. And I think part of that is just with the larger audiences. The one that might dip a little bit, or where it might be a little bit more iffy, is afternoon shows during the weekday. But for the most part, people, especially who chose to go there, are gonna engage. Very few walkouts. So yeah.
AJ put his email address at the very end for just a second, but I'm gonna tell me if this is the right email address,
That
AJ.
is correct. Yes,
Okay,
that is
all right.
my student email. Yep.
And then, I mean, this goes back to what Alan said a little bit, and extending on to Cora's question of what was the show actually like.
Yep.
Pacific Science Center is no slouch when it comes to pedagogy. I'm assuming they had some sort of assessment of prior knowledge and periodic assessment questions built into the show. Did I miss that when you were going over what the show was like, or?
So yeah, for the most part, that would be, I wouldn't say improv, but there were, presenter prompts for asking audience. It would, for the most part, most of the content would be introduced in the form of a question. just to sense a response. Let me think of an example. It might
No,
be,
it's all right.
yeah.
Yeah, it's I was just wanted to, you know, follow on to Alan's question of, yeah, the assessment of what did they understand after you explained it to them or after you showed the visual,
Right.
could be done in the class. And in terms of recording as well, you know, you're saying it's still going on, right?
Right.
It's still being shown. I've always found it practically impossible to record video in the dome. You know, other people have done it, obviously, but for me, for just my everyday stuff, I just record my audio. Like I just hook up my microphone to a recording system, and then I just do the audio. And that way, when I do it, because I do it from the microphone specifically, I also get the audience responses as well when I pass them the microphone. So that's just how I've done it, and I've found if you, because you can also record what's going on in the dome separately, right? So if you record the dome visuals and then you also record the audio, I think I found it to be useful, at least for myself, in terms of self-evaluation. But yeah, is the script at least published somewhere? You said your research is published in the planetarium.
I believe,
Yeah.
I know the actual like visuals of the show are downloadable. Again, I'm not a planetarian, but I can ask about that. And then the script itself, I don't know if it's published or included in those materials, but I would imagine it is, because I think the goal was to get other folks to adopt this content. So I'm pretty sure, at least the visuals itself and the data sets, they're all public. I'll have to locate where they are, and then I can email Alan. Yeah.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Or again.
Yeah, sorry. No, I just Googled your planetarium and found out that you have concentric seating, which is not as common as it used to be in the past. So again, asking about image composition approaches. So did you had like, I guess, panoramic images, but if you wanted the audience to focus on something, did you put it in the center of the dome, or did you duplicate things? Like, what was your approach on that?
Yeah, I don't recall anything that was duplicated. It was the entire dome itself was covered. But I think it for the most part, most of the images can be seen from every perspective. But if they needed to focus, it might be like a look over there kind of direction. But I don't think that didn't come up commonly. Yeah.
Okay, so one idea that just came up to my head, is that it would be interesting to compare that show you made in omnidirectional image composition approach into a unidirectional one, and compare that in another planetarium, and see if people remember or recall more stimuli, because they might not have missed any stimuli. So I think it would be interesting to see if there's anything that shows up due to the image composition approach, because it is quite likely that when you have omnidirectional seating, as we have in Kiel, that people might miss a stimuli, although if you have someone pointing in different directions and trying to like focus their attention, it is sometimes quite likely that people, I don't know, are distracted for a second and then don't know where they have to look at. So I think that's just an idea that came up. You might want to think about, I don't know.
That's an interesting idea for a research question. That also brings up the problem that there's not enough grad students doing studies in this area to cover all the possible questions that could come up, and people have to select their question. But that's a good one. It's interesting.
Yeah, Alan, as a concentric seating diehard, I don't even know if I want to know the answer of whether which one's better. You know, I love concentric seating mostly because of the interactions that it allows, as opposed to like a theater style seating where it's unidirectional. When you're sitting in a circle, you know, I think there has been research on sitting in a circle in terms of education, and circle time, but I find it much, much better in terms of presenting a live show if we're all sitting in a circle together. And like you said, Cor, there are plenty of strategies to duplicate images across the dome, to just give people more time to look around the dome in a given sequence. Yeah, so I am a diehard concentric seating person myself.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a diehard. I moved towards the semicircular modality. I forget what there's a name for that, where it's not complete circle, but not just directional. It's
Like the U shape.
yes, the U shape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a small note, because there might be something coming up from me from my master thesis in the upcoming planetarium regarding unidirectional and omnidirectional image composition approaches and attention. So that might be of interest.
We'll be on the lookout.
But Alan, you're the one who made me a concentric seating diehard.
Well, my apologies, or not. No, I was raised in circular seating in a dome that could only hold 27 people. So
yeah, that does make a difference, I think. Certainly.
Rosemary.
So getting to polar science, and the show was developed starting maybe 5 years ago. It's currently being shown. New research is coming up. Is there any part in the show where some, sort of latest results or more recent results come into it, or is it pretty static?
As of right now, the grant and evaluation has kind of sunsetted, but I have not seen the show recently, and I can ask is the best answer I could give right now. But yeah, I would be interested in that because yeah, public perceptions are maybe different, especially in the Seattle area. And then I guess in terms of segmenting the populations again, whether folks were from the Seattle area versus visiting, it was very seasonal. So that's also a question that I had when it comes down to like audience perceptions, because we did get a few write-ins, not included in the study sample, but that were just like climate change doesn't exist, or comments like that, or just to get that in. So yeah, I kind of wonder about that.
We're going to keep on going here, but I just, in case people have to leave, I wanted to do one more, thank you, AJ. This has been a really great experience. We're not cutting it off right now because we can continue. We're not limited to an hour, but in case people have to leave, thank you. Thank you for coming, everybody who came. This has been very interesting and a good discussion. And we can continue.
Thanks, Alan. You're right. I do actually have to run, but I did want to ask AJ one more thing before I run off. Your finding about the women having a more of a attitude change, was that how you put it? An attitude change for polar science?
I think their level of before and after, I don't think I called it anything in particular, but their before and after perception of their interest in polar science.
So was the finding that they started at a lower level, but then they got up to kind of like the average level of everybody afterwards?
Yeah. So there's a weird statistical artifacting of that. Their baseline and their ending point weren't statistically different, but the interaction or the effect of going from, and I think this is possibly due to the sample size, there were more women than men, but it's robust enough to say that the effect is there and stronger in women, especially if you bring in age, like under 18. And even though we collected more segmentation of those differences, we just, to make it dichotomous, it was under 18 and then adult. Yeah, the younger women had a bigger increase compared to other study populations. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. And then you know, before I run off, what's your next project going to be, just so I can look out for it?
Yeah, so I'm dissertating, and this has been a long, lots, or not really change in topic, but change in methodologies. My work is related to policy, more policy level, statewide analysis of Louisiana's public schools. Again, I was a public school science teacher in Louisiana, and yeah, it's, you know, principal and teacher perceptions of access to advanced learning and different services for different students within their schools. So it's also based off of one of the studies that we did in Washington. But my background in or how I got my foot in the door, I guess, into education research in Washington was because previously as a Louisiana science teacher, I worked with a few oceanographers at the Naval Research Lab at Stennis Space Center because I was a coach of a robotics team. And then when I had applied, they were like, hey, you kind of know ocean stuff maybe, and then threw me into the Pacific Science Center project, which was great. And that was a great first research experience, or, for my doctoral program. But
Very well, thank you again so much, AJ.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate this. It's really, really valuable.
Thanks.
All right, bye.
Anybody who came in late by chance, if you haven't signed in to the chat, everybody put their name and where they're from in the chat. I think almost everybody did, but if you came in late, you might have missed that part. We've had an interesting discussion about seating arrangements here. We're getting more things about how circular or unidirectional. That's always a big question, but I think it makes a big difference how big the planetarium is, how big an audience you're dealing with. That's also a big question when you're dealing with audience participation programs. How do you do audience participation with a larger audience? That's I have to mention that there was an IPS conference, International Planetarium Society conference in Montreal many years ago, and I put in submitted a talk that was to be done in the dome, and it was on doing audience participation in a big dome. And I had never done that before. So this was like, it was out there. I was trying out some things with this audience, and some of them didn't work, but others did. So I thought it was very interesting how you can do audience participation in a large dome. Is another big interest of mine, actually. Well, any last questions before it's time to sign off? My wait time, 1001, 1002.
What's your next one?
Oh, the next seminar? Yeah, actually, I haven't posted that yet, but what it's going to be, and I have to reach out to certain people to attend this. It's going to be one that is, and we don't quite have the title yet. It'll probably come out today because I always like to have it at least a month in advance what the next one's going to be. Usually we have it well more months in advance. But it's going to be memories both old and new. So we're inviting old timers and new timers to come and share their memories and thoughts. It's sort of a free, open discussion, not an actual presentation. So I'm going to be reaching out, and Joyce, you would be one of the I hesitate to say you would be one of the old timers. You don't look like an old timer. But we have a few more lined up after that. And I guess I should announce here that Rosemary is interested in taking over and has agreed to be a coordinator for the Planetarium Zoom seminars. And we'll probably be hosting next month or the month after, but in 2024, there'll be a somewhat of a change.
I think in March we have Noreen Grice talking about tactile astronomy. And then I think Jeff Nee, who is here, is going to do something on working with layers for those of us interested in making some custom content for planetariums.
And we're always looking for anybody is invited to do a topic that is of interest to you and to other people. Any of you here would be welcome to do that. Cal, Cora, Jeremy. Jeremy actually did one not long ago about his planetarium.
And you can always volunteer someone else anonymously if you would like to.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording at this point.